Hello, everyone. The soft hum of the television filled the room, blending seamlessly with the warm, suburban calm of the evening. Liam was sunk deep into the plush cushions of the living room couch, his gaze fixed on the football game playing on the screen. A cold beer rested in his hand, beads of condensation sliding down the bottle. Down the hall, the faint sound of running water echoed, the unmistakable rhythm of Helen's shower. Their son, Mark, sat cross-legged on the carpet nearby, his small face illuminated by the glow of Helen's phone. The giggles of cartoon characters filled the air as he laughed along, blissfully immersed in the show. "Daddy, look!" Mark suddenly chirped, waddling over with the phone clutched tightly in his little hands. Liam smiled, leaning forward. "What is it, buddy?" "Someone sent Mommy a message." Mark grinned innocently, handing over the phone as if he'd discovered treasure. Liam chuckled, taking the phone casually. His eyes flickered to the screen, and the smile froze on his face. The message read, "How sweet you are, especially last night." The name, Arthur, hovered above it like a phantom. For a moment, Liam stared, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. His pulse quickened as the screen dimmed, forcing him to tap it to reveal the message again. "Daddy?" Mark's voice was soft, unsure why his father had gone so still. "It's okay, Mark," Liam said, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. "Why don't you go watch your cartoons on the TV? I'll handle this." Mark nodded, scampering back to the couch. Liam glanced toward the bathroom, the sound of water still cascading from the showerhead. Helen was oblivious. With a trembling hand, he scrolled upward through the message thread. Each word, each flirtatious exchange between Helen and Arthur, felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his chest. "Wish I could see you again tonight. Last night was unforgettable. I'll never get enough of you." His breathing grew heavier. Each line unraveled the life he thought he knew. A photo appeared, a smiling selfie of Helen and Arthur, their faces close, their eyes alight with a familiarity that Liam had never questioned before. He scrolled further, his hands shaking as he pieced together a narrative he hadn't realized was unfolding right under his nose. The bathroom door creaked open. Liam hastily locked the phone and set it on the table, his heart hammering in his chest. Helen appeared, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. "Mark, you shouldn't play with my phone," she said lightly, ruffling their son's hair as she passed. Liam watched her, his mind racing. How had he missed it? The late nights, the sudden errands, the unexplained absences, all dismissed as the quirks of a busy life. But now the pieces didn't just fit. They painted an undeniable picture. As Helen retreated to their bedroom, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him, Liam sat back on the couch. His beer was untouched, the condensation forming a puddle on the table. Mark's laughter filled the room again, but Liam couldn't hear it over the deafening roar of his thoughts. Betrayal had entered his home, and everything he knew was about to unravel. Liam sat in the dimly lit living room long after Helen had disappeared into the bedroom. Mark had dozed off on the couch, his small body curled under a throw blanket, his breathing soft and steady. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of the refrigerator. The phone sat on the coffee table, a glowing reminder of the betrayal he couldn't unsee. He stared at it, conflicted. Part of him wanted to confront Helen immediately, demand an explanation, and rip the truth out of her. But another part, a colder, more calculating side he rarely acknowledged, knew that charging into battle unprepared would do no good. If he wanted answers, real answers, he needed more than a single incriminating thread of texts. His fingers hovered over the screen as he unlocked it again, scrolling with purpose now. He bypassed the sweet, flirtatious messages, focusing instead on timelines, locations, details that could tell him how far this had gone. One particular message stopped him cold. "Mark's asleep. I'll leave in 3 p.m." The timestamp was from a night 3 weeks ago, an evening Helen had told him she was at a late work meeting. His stomach churned as realization set in. She had left Mark alone, their innocent little boy, to sneak off and meet Arthur. Liam gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles white. The weight of betrayal threatened to crush him. It wasn't just about her cheating anymore. It was about the lies, the risks, the utter disregard for the family they'd built together. He stood abruptly, his heart pounding. He couldn't sit there any longer, drowning in the storm of his thoughts. Moving with quiet precision, he slipped into the master bedroom. Helen was asleep, her body rising and falling with the rhythm of her breathing. She looked peaceful, serene, a cruel contrast to the chaos swirling in Liam's chest. On the nightstand, her handbag sat open, its contents spilling out slightly. He knelt beside it, careful not to make a sound. His hands sifted through the clutter, lipstick, receipts, loose change, until his fingers brushed against something solid. He pulled it out, a pregnancy test, wrapped in its plastic casing. His breath hitched. The faint pink line stared back at him, mocking him with its clarity. His thoughts raced, doing the math. They hadn't been intimate in weeks, months, even. The timeline didn't fit. His hands trembled as he placed the test back and continued searching. Next came folded papers, tucked haphazardly near her wallet. Liam unfolded them, his eyes scanning the headers. Midtown Women's Clinic. His gaze dropped to the date. It aligned perfectly with the text message he'd just read. A doctor's note confirmed what the test had already told him. Helen was pregnant, and the child wasn't his. He couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around him, the air thick and suffocating. Quietly, he gathered the test and the documents, snapping photos with his phone. This was more than betrayal. This was destruction. The life he thought he had built was crumbling before his eyes. When he was done, he placed everything back where he found it and returned to the living room. Mark stirred slightly as Liam sat beside him, pulling the blanket higher over his little shoulders. The boy's face was peaceful, untouched by the horrors. The morning sun crept through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the living room. Liam hadn't slept a wink. His mind had been a battlefield, replaying the messages, the pregnancy test, the clinic documents. Each revelation felt like another crack in the foundation of his life. Mark stirred first, stretching his small arms with a soft yawn. Liam smiled faintly, brushing a hand through his son's unruly hair. "Good morning, buddy." Mark blinked sleepily and smiled. "Morning, Daddy. Can we have pancakes?" "Of course," Liam replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging within. He needed normalcy for Mark's sake. The boy didn't deserve to bear the weight of what was happening. As Liam started breakfast, Helen emerged from the bedroom. She was dressed in her usual morning routine attire, leggings, and an oversized sweater, her damp hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked at Liam with a casual smile, her expression betraying none of the chaos she had sown. "Morning," she said brightly, her tone disarming. "Morning," Liam replied evenly, flipping a pancake. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on the skillet. Mark bounded into the kitchen, grabbing Helen's leg in a hug. "Mommy, pancakes." "Lucky us," Helen said, laughing softly as she scooped him up. "What's gotten into you this morning, huh?" Liam watched out of the corner of his eye, his stomach twisting at the sight. Her affection for Mark seemed genuine, but now he couldn't trust any part of her. How much of their life had been a lie? Breakfast passed in a haze of forced smiles and polite conversation. Mark's chatter filled the silence Liam refused to break. Helen seemed oblivious, her demeanor as breezy as ever. But as soon as Helen left the kitchen to take a call, Liam's facade cracked. He clenched his fists, the cool edge of the table biting into his palms. After breakfast, Liam excused himself to the garage under the pretense of fixing the lawnmower. In reality, he needed time to think, to solidify his plan. The evidence he had wasn't just a weapon against Helen. It was a shield to protect Mark. He wouldn't let her lies jeopardize their son's future. He retrieved his phone and called a lawyer, someone he had researched during the sleepless hours of the night. The line rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "This is Susan Blake," the voice said. "How can I help you?" Liam inhaled deeply, steadying his nerves. "I need to discuss filing for divorce. I have evidence of infidelity, and there's more. It involves custody of my son." Susan's tone shifted instantly, becoming sharp and focused. "I understand. Why don't you start by telling me everything?" Liam laid it all out. The texts, the pregnancy, the risks Helen had taken with Mark's safety. Susan listened without interruption, her occasional hums of acknowledgement encouraging him to continue. When he finished, she said, "You've done the right thing by gathering evidence. The messages, the test, the clinic documents, all of it strengthens your case. I'll prepare the initial filing today, and we'll move forward with securing temporary custody of your son." Liam's shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time since the betrayal came to light, he felt like he had a path forward. That evening, Helen's mood remained cheerful, completely unaware of the storm brewing. She cooked dinner, humming to herself as if nothing had changed. Liam watched her from across the kitchen, his face carefully neutral. Every movement she made, every smile she offered, felt like a mockery. As they sat at the table, Helen glanced at him, her smile faltering slightly. "You've been quiet today. Everything okay?" Liam took a slow sip of water, meeting her gaze. "Just a lot on my mind." "Work?" she asked, tilting her head. "Something like that," he replied, his tone clipped. Helen studied him for a moment, then shrugged, turning her attention back to Mark, who was enthusiastically recounting his day. Liam forced himself to relax, letting the conversation flow around him. He couldn't tip his hand. Not yet. But with every passing hour, the confrontation loomed closer. And when the moment came, he would be ready. The next morning was tense, though Helen didn't seem to notice. Liam moved through the motions of breakfast and small talk, masking his turmoil under a calm exterior. He had spent most of the night preparing for this moment. Every word, every point of evidence he would present, all designed to dismantle Helen's web of lies. Mark was dropped off at school as usual, his cheerful wave the last bit of brightness Liam needed to steady himself. When he returned home, Helen was tidying the living room, her phone and a mug of coffee on the table. She looked up and smiled, a casual, unguarded gesture that only fueled Liam's anger. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice cool. Helen glanced at him, her smile fading slightly. "Sure. What's up?" Liam sat down, his movements deliberate. He placed his phone on the table between them and leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Helen frowned, setting down the throw pillow she had been fluffing. "What's this about?" "Arthur," Liam said, the name hanging in the air like a dagger. Her reaction was instantaneous. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it with confusion. "Arthur? What are you talking about?" Liam's lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't play dumb, Helen. I saw the messages. The ones Mark accidentally opened and showed me. I've seen all of them." Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Liam cut her off. "Before you start lying, let me make this clear. I know everything. I know about the late-night meetings, the pregnancy, the clinic. I've got the messages, the documents, and the photos to prove it." Helen's face turned pale. She stood frozen, her hands gripping the back of the couch. You went through my stuff," she finally stammered. "You mean your bag?" "Yes, I did," Liam said, his voice rising slightly. "Because while I was here raising our son, you were sneaking off with another man. So spare me the outrage." Helen's mask of defiance cracked, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I can explain." "No, you can't," Liam interrupted sharply. "There's no explanation for abandoning Mark to meet some guy, or for lying to my face for God knows how long, or for being pregnant with someone else's child while pretending we're a family." Tears streamed down Helen's face, but Liam felt nothing. Not pity, not sympathy, just a cold, simmering rage. She started to speak, her words choked by sobs. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Don't," he snapped. "Don't you dare try to make this sound like an accident. You made choices, Helen. Deliberate, calculated choices. And now you're going to face the consequences." She looked up at him, her expression pleading. "Please, Liam, we can fix this. I'll end it with Arthur." "I'll fix this?" Liam laughed bitterly. "You think we can fix this? You've shattered everything we had, everything I thought we were. And now you want me to what? Forgive you? Pretend this never happened?" Helen flinched, but she didn't respond. The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on them both. Liam stood, his movements stiff with anger. Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing for divorce. You can pack your things and leave. Mark stays with me. You've already proven you're incapable of putting him first. You can't just take him. Helen protested, her voice cracking. I can and I will, Liam said coldly. The evidence is on my side. You abandoned him. You lied to me. You lied to us. The courts will see it the same way. Helen stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, she slumped back, defeated. Liam turned away, his chest heaving as the adrenaline coursed through him. You have until tomorrow to leave, he said over his shoulder. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving Helen to her tears. Upstairs, he locked himself in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as he tried to steady himself. The confrontation was over, but the fallout had only just begun. The next day dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that perfectly matched the heaviness in the air. Liam stood in the kitchen, sipping his coffee and listening to the faint rustle of movement upstairs. Helen was packing. She had avoided him entirely since the confrontation, retreating into the bedroom and emerging only to grab boxes and tape from the garage. Mark was at school, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing at home. Liam was grateful for the reprieve. He didn't know how he'd explain Helen's absence to their son just yet. The sound of Helen's suitcase wheels clattering down the stairs broke his thoughts. She appeared moments later, her face pale and drawn, the spark that once defined her replaced by something hollow. She set her suitcase by the door, hesitating as if searching for words. I'm leaving, she said quietly, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Liam didn't respond. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of anger and detachment. I need to say, Helen trailed off, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry, Liam, for everything. I know I hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I do love Mark. Please, don't turn him against me. Liam's jaw tightened. Mark will know the truth when he's old enough to understand it. Until then, I'll do what's best for him. You don't get to decide what that is anymore. Her face crumpled, but she nodded, picking up her suitcase. She paused at the door, glancing back at him one last time. Goodbye, Liam. He didn't reply. She hesitated, then turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Liam alone in the suffocating silence of the house. He stared at the door for a long moment before turning away, his resolve hardening. By the time Mark came home that afternoon, Liam had already packed away every trace of Helen. Her belongings were stashed in the garage, ready for her to retrieve later. The house felt emptier, cleaner, but also raw, as if it had been stripped of its protective layers. Mark burst through the door with his usual energy, throwing his backpack onto the floor. Daddy, can we play catch later? He asked, beaming up at Liam. Of course, buddy, Liam said, ruffling his hair. But first, let's talk for a minute. Mark blinked, sensing the serious tone in his father's voice. Liam led him to the couch, sitting down beside him and pulling him close. Mark, Mommy isn't going to be living here with us anymore, Liam began, choosing his words carefully. She's staying somewhere else for a while. Mark's face scrunched in confusion. Why? Liam hesitated. Sometimes, grown-ups don't get along, even when they care about each other. But no matter what happens, I want you to remember this. I love you more than anything, and I'm always going to be here for you. Mark stared at him, his lower lip trembling. Is it my fault? The question hit Liam like a punch to the gut. He pulled Mark into a tight hug, his voice firm. No, Mark. It's not your fault. It's not your fault at all. You didn't do anything wrong. Mark nodded against his chest, his small arms wrapping tightly around Liam. They stayed like that for a long time, the quiet of the house broken only by the occasional sniffle from Mark. Over the following weeks, the reality of Helen's absence began to settle in. Liam filed for divorce, his lawyer Susan reassuring him every step of the way that the evidence would ensure custody of Mark. Helen's attempts to contest the custody agreement were weak at best. Liam's meticulous documentation of her infidelity and neglect of Mark painted a clear picture, and the court ruled in his favor. Mark adjusted to the new routine with a resilience Liam admired. He threw himself into school and sports, his boundless energy filling the house with life. But there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when Liam caught him staring at Helen's empty seat at the dinner table or hesitating before running to tell a story, as if he expected her to be there. Liam did his best to fill the gaps, pouring himself into fatherhood with a determination he hadn't known he possessed. He spent his evenings helping Mark with homework, coaching his baseball practices, and reading stories at bedtime. Slowly, the house began to feel like a home again. Not the same, but theirs. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mark turned to him and asked, "Do you think Mommy will come back?" Liam took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the fading light. "I don't know, buddy. But what I do know is that no matter what, we're going to be okay. You and me, we're a team." Mark smiled at that, leaning his head against Liam's shoulder. "A good team." Liam wrapped an arm around him, his chest swelling with a mixture of pride and sadness. "The best." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Liam felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. The wounds of Helen's betrayal were still there, but they were healing, slowly but surely. For Mark's sake, he would keep moving forward, one day at a time. Months passed, and the rhythm of life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. The divorce was finalized quickly. Helen's weak attempts to fight for custody crumbled in the face of Liam's evidence. She was granted limited visitation rights, but only under strict conditions. Liam made it clear that Mark's well-being was his only priority, and he wouldn't compromise on that. Liam sold the house. It was too big, too full of memories, both good and bad. Every corner seemed to echo with reminders of Helen's betrayal, and he needed a fresh start. With the proceeds, he purchased a smaller house on the edge of town. It was modest but warm, surrounded by tall trees and a spacious yard where Mark could play. Moving day was chaotic but cathartic. Olivia, Liam's childhood friend and an unwavering presence throughout the ordeal, showed up to help with the heavy lifting. She carried boxes and cracked jokes, her energy infectious. By evening, the new house was cluttered with unpacked boxes, but it already felt more like home. "You did good, Liam," Olivia said as they sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching Mark chase fireflies in the yard. "This place is perfect for you too." Liam nodded, his gaze following his son. "It's a new start. That's what we need." Olivia nudged him with her elbow, a grin tugging at her lips. "So, when are you going to stop sulking and ask me to dinner?" Liam blinked, startled by her playful tone. "What?" "I'm kidding," she laughed, raising her hands in mock defense. "Well, mostly. But seriously, Liam, you're doing okay, right?" He smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through him for the first time in months. "Yeah, Liv, I think I am." Liam threw himself into fatherhood with renewed purpose. He woke up early to make Mark's favorite breakfasts, stayed up late helping with school projects, and cheered the loudest at every baseball game. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, movie nights, and quiet moments of laughter that reminded Liam what he was fighting for. The new house became a sanctuary, filled with the sounds of their life together. Liam discovered a love for woodworking, crafting shelves and furniture that gave the space a personal touch. Mark decorated his room with posters of dinosaurs and astronauts, his infectious excitement turning the house into a place of joy. Helen's visits were rare and strained. She came by once a month, as the court allowed, but her presence felt like an intrusion. Mark, perceptive even at his young age, seemed unsure of how to act around her. He greeted her politely, but the easy affection he once had was gone. Helen tried to reach out to Liam a few times, her tone apologetic, but he kept the conversation strictly about Mark. The damage she had done was irreparable, and he wasn't interested in rebuilding bridges she had burned. One evening, as Liam was putting the finishing touches on a bookshelf for the living room, Mark wandered in with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you miss Mommy?" he asked, his voice small. Liam paused, setting down his tools. He knelt in front of Mark, meeting his curious gaze. "That's a hard question, buddy. I miss the good times we had, but I don't miss the way things ended. What about you?" Mark hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Sometimes. But I like it here. It feels better. Liam pulled him into a hug, his heart aching with pride and sorrow. That's what matters, Mark. As long as you're happy, that's all I care about. Over time, Liam's scars began to fade. The betrayal no longer consumed him. It became a lesson, a reminder of his resilience. He focused on creating a stable, loving home for Mark, a place where they could both heal and grow. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they played catch in the yard, Liam caught Mark grinning at him. "You're the best, Daddy," Mark said, his voice filled with sincerity. Liam smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting. "Thanks, buddy. I'm trying. You don't have to try. You just are." The words struck Liam deeply. In that moment, he realized he had succeeded in the one thing that mattered most, being the father Mark needed. As the leaves fell around them, the future no longer seemed daunting. It was filled with promise, a blank slate ready for them to write their story. Together, winter came softly to the new house, blanketing the yard in snow and turning the world into a quiet, frozen landscape. Inside, the warmth of a roaring fire and the smell of hot cocoa filled the air. Mark had spent the afternoon building a snowman in the yard, his cheeks red from the cold, but his smile wide with accomplishment. Liam watched from the window, his heart swelling as his son adjusted the scarf around the snowman's neck with great precision. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive with genuine joy. No shadows of betrayal lingering in the corners, no weight of deceit pressing down on his shoulders. Later that evening, they sat by the fire, the flicker of flames casting a golden glow over the room. Mark was curled up with a blanket and a book, his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. Liam sipped his coffee, content in the silence they shared. "Daddy," Mark said suddenly, his voice soft. "Yeah, buddy? Do you think things will always stay like this?" Liam set his mug down and turned to him. "What do you mean?" Mark shrugged, his eyes on the fire. "It just feels nice. Like nothing bad can happen." Liam smiled, pulling Mark closer. "That's what I want for us, Mark. A place where you feel safe and happy. And as long as I'm here, I promise I'll do everything I can to keep it that way." Mark looked up at him, his expression serious for a moment before breaking into a grin. "You're doing a good job." The weeks passed, and the house settled into a peaceful routine. Liam continued to pour himself into fatherhood and his newfound love of woodworking. He started taking on small projects for neighbors, crafting tables, chairs, and shelves that soon became a local favorite. The work gave him purpose, a way to channel his energy and rebuild his sense of self. Olivia remained a steady presence, dropping by often to check on him and Mark. Her visits were a mix of laughter, light-hearted teasing, and genuine support. One snowy evening, she arrived with a box of cookies and a mischievous grin. "You've been holed up in this house too long," she announced, setting the box on the counter. "We're going sledding tomorrow." "Sledding?" Liam raised an eyebrow. "Are we kids again?" "You'll see," Olivia said with a smirk, ruffling Mark's hair. "It's exactly what you two need." The next day, they found themselves at the top of a steep, snow-covered hill, the cold air filled with the shouts and laughter of other families. Mark was ecstatic, dragging a bright red sled behind him as he raced to the starting point. Liam couldn't help but laugh as Olivia shoved him onto a sled, her grin wide. "Ready?" "I don't think I have a choice," he muttered, gripping the sled tightly. "Not even a little." She gave him a push, and he was off, careening down the hill with Mark's laughter echoing behind him. By the time they reached the bottom, their faces were flushed from the cold and their sides ached from laughter. Liam hadn't felt that light in years. As he looked up at the hill where Mark and Olivia were waving at him, he realized he hadn't just survived the storm. He had come out stronger. Spring arrived with the promise of new beginnings. The snow melted, revealing the lush green of the yard, and the house felt alive with the warmth of sunlight streaming through the windows. Liam spent his mornings working on furniture and his afternoons playing catch with Mark. Helen's sporadic visits continued, but they were civil and uneventful. Mark no longer seemed troubled by her presence. Instead, he accepted it as part of his life, though his bond with her lacked the closeness they once shared. One evening, As Liam tucked Mark into bed, his son looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy, do you ever get sad?" Liam paused, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes, but not as much as I used to." Mark nodded, as if that answer satisfied him. "I don't get sad as much either. I like it here." Liam smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Mark's forehead. "I like it too, buddy. We're doing okay, aren't we?" "We're doing great," Mark said with certainty, his eyes closing as he drifted off to sleep. Liam sat there for a long moment, watching his son breathe softly. The road to this point hadn't been easy, but they had made it. Together, they had turned the pain of the past into a foundation for something stronger. As Liam stood and turned off the light, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. They were more than okay. They were building a life filled with love, resilience, and hope. And that, he realized, was more than enough. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.